Hello, I'm Kate Jacobson with the Ramsey County Library, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's talk, which is part of the 2024 Tuesday with a Scholar series. Our speaker today is Henry Berman, and our topic is Iran versus Saudi Arabia. And in this first week, we will be looking at Iran. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people, and it is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose lands we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relationships with our tribal nations. So about our speaker, Henry Berman has an MBA from Tufts School of Business from Dartmouth College, and he's worked 34 years at Ecolab, but is now retired. He has been on the Speakers Bureau for Great Decisions and also currently lectures at OLLI, primarily on the Middle East. That's his main area of focus. And today, this course is rather timely. So let's turn it over to Henry.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm so happy, just delighted to be a part of this program both today and a week from today. And we're going to be discussing a very interesting and unique, I call it the ultimate rivalry in the Middle East, is Saudi Arabia versus Iran. And first of all, I'm going to switch over to my, I'm going to go to the screen here. Okay, good. We've got the screen set up. Iran versus Saudi Arabia. I thought it would be a very interesting twist to compare and contrast these two rival Islamic countries at this point in time and just try to understand how and why they are rivals. They have been for centuries. It is described in many different ways, their relationship, whether it's a rivalry or hostile combatants. More recently in time, more I would say they have a almost a Cold War between the two. Why is that? What makes it unusual? First thought comes to mind when you look at Iran and Saudi Arabia is that neither one of them are a democracy. Very clearly, they are not a democracy, neither one of them. And yet, having said that, their relationships with the United States are very, very different. With one of these countries, Iran, the relationship is very, very frosty with the United States. In Saudi Arabia, it's been a relatively warm relationship going back to the end of World War II. And the frosty relationship with Iran goes back to 1979. We're going to talk about the sources of those, about the dynamics. Literally, some of this goes back to dynamics of colonialism and also the dynamics of the Cold War that have just continued to this day. So with that, I'm going to move on. And let's just talk about, let's see how I can do this. Here we go. Sources of tension between the two countries. Instinctively, these sources of intention of tension, particularly the first two bullet points, have been around for centuries. Ethnicity. Iran is not, I repeat, not an Arab country. Iran is a Persian country. That's the primary ethnicity of Iran is Persian, which goes back several thousands of years, and it identifies them, and they have a strong nationalist feeling, which we'll be talking about. Also, Saudi Arabia is an ethnic Arab country. Arabs and Persians are two completely different ethnicities. Somebody from Iran once presented in a presentation said to the audience, don't ever call a Persian an Arab, or vice versa. This is a very, very distinct and separate ethnicities, and by and large, they don't think highly of one another. And this goes back a long, long ways in time. The second, of course, source is religion. Both are followers of Islam, but Iran believes in the Shia version of Islam, and Iraq, I'm sorry, and Saudi Arabia believes in Sunnis. Now, Shias and Sunnis, the two branches split, going all the way back to the generation after the life of Muhammad. There was a division as to who was to follow in the leadership after Muhammad's death. On one side, the Sunnis believed that it should be based on merit, and the Shias believed that it should be based on hereditary strands. So they split up at that point in time, and they've never gotten back together. And every once in a while, by and large, this has not been a big deal, but every once in a while, uh, throughout the ages, certain leaders have capitalized on this difference and tried to build up and engender friction between the two. And so this is a strong source. Right now, I would say 85% of the followers of Islam globally are Sunni Muslims, and about 15% are Shia. And the majority of them, the largest Shia population in any country in the world, is in Iran. And all of the Shia population resides in the Middle East. And we'll talk to that in a few minutes. But these ethnicity and religion are two major sources of competitiveness and sometimes outright hostility between these two countries. There are many people, one other point about ethnicities, there are many people that believe that the majority, if not all, followers of Islam in the world are ethnic Arabs, and that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, in fact, only 18% of followers of Islam globally, 18% are ethnic Arab. Okay, and most of them, all of them, should say, live in the Middle East. Okay, and the largest numbers primarily are in Saudi Arabia. So remember, keep in mind throughout this the ethnicity and the religion. And then the other thing that strikes one is the duration of these hostilities. I've often talked when I've discussed the Middle East. The Middle East tragically has had, I call them bigotries, prejudices, just mindless hostility going back centuries. So the duration of these are just not easy to break through. Very difficult. And therein lies the source of so many conflicts in that region of the world. The other thing, and we're going to talk about this in detail in a few minutes, Iran and Saudi Arabia have very close proximity to one another. They're just separated by one body of water. And so that makes the tensions between them even stronger. Had they lived on different parts of the region or the world, the tensions would not be so high. But they are very close to one another, and that heightens the tension as well. I think the best way to describe them right now is that historically they've always been regional competitors. They have their own different set of allies. It's pretty unusual for there to be one country that has a harmonious relations with both countries. And we'll talk to that. Uh, Once again, I mentioned before, they have very different relations with the United States. The United States has a very different approach to interacting with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we're going to spend a little bit of time, both this week and next week, delving into the history of the two. Okay, and then additionally, we will tap into a little bit of what are the implications of this rivalry as a result of the Gaza war with Israel, the Hamas versus Israel. Okay, we'll delve into that as well. Okay, let's move on. This general outline, generally speaking, I'm going to try to follow both this week and next week. But of course, this week we'll talk about it as it applies more to Iran. Next week, we'll follow this structure more as it applies to Saudi Arabia. We're going to have a map out. I'm going to put the same map out in the following slide next week. And once again, the focus will be on the different country, but I want there to be very clear about just how close the two are to one another. And we'll talk about the respective histories. Um, Governance is very important, understanding the different ways that the countries are governed. Neither are democracy, but there are some distinctions between the two. And there are, with both of them, right at this point in time, some leadership succession issues, which can question internally within either country the stability of both countries. And that's why we're also going to discuss the nature of any domestic unrest that are going on right now in both countries. And just as a little sidelight, this issue of domestic unrest is particularly pronounced right now in Iran, more so than Saudi Arabia. We're also going to talk about the nature of each of their allies, how strong they are, what degree of influence both Iran and Saudi Arabia have on their respective allies, and their different camps. Lastly, I'm always going to reference what are some issues to watch in the news, to be mindful of as we watch the news, as we see what events are unfolding in this part of the world. So, this is the core outline that I'm going to use both today and next week as it applies to each respective country. Some opening observations in talking about Iran. Iran is domestically has a lot of domestic unrest. They truly do. And they're kind of, in a way, at a domestic impasse because the regime consists of unrepentant revolutionaries going back to 1979 when the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah of Iran. These are very, very strongly focused and unrepentant revolutionaries who follow to the T the precepts of Islam. On the other side, there are the people. And the people, by and large, are not all that supportive of the country, which makes for some tensions within the country itself. And the people tend to want to move on. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail. But this is a very hot issue. There were tremendous number of riots in Iran about a year and a half ago. They've toned down a little, but they've really been going on off and on for the last 15 years. And they will likely continue. This is very, very important to remember. In 1953, the United States, the CIA, supported an overthrow of the Iranian regime. It was a democratically elected government and supported an overthrow. And ever since that time, they supported the ascension of the Shah of Iran. And ever since that time, there's been a tremendous amount of hostility by the Iranians towards the United States. That is probably a lot of the source of that. And the flip side of that, in 1979, the Shah of Iran, who was tremendously tyrannical and oppressive, he was overthrown by some core radical Islamists. And you may recall there was a hostage crisis, and that event, we'll talk in more detail, really triggered a great deal of animus from the United States toward Iran. And those hatreds, which I have on the bottom here, have been very prevalent for decades between the two. And the two countries just cannot work through this. They just cannot work through this at all. And it's extremely unfortunate. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. But suffice it to say, I want to stress this. There's been a lot of chatter wishing on the part of American governments that there would be regime change in Iran today. And I believe very strongly if there is regime change, it must come from within. The United States cannot make the same mistake again. And it appears that they are supporting or driving this. The worst mistake that could possibly be made, this is an editorial comment, we can certainly debate this, is for the United States to let's just say, land uh, 5,000 or something troops and overthrow the government. This must absolutely come from within. And we're going to talk to that a little bit. The map, as you can see, this is the whole Middle East region. Saudi Arabia is the largest in size, and Iran is a close second. Iran is the 18th largest country in the world. It's about one half the size of the lower 48 of the United States. It's primarily mountainous. Just take a look at how close these two countries are to each other. Just to give you an idea of this Persian-Arabian conflict, I think this is actually amusing. A uh, a um, there's a body of water called commonly in the West by the Persian Gulf. Persian Gulf is the term used by the Iranians. Saudis refer to this as the Arabian Sea. Okay, it's not the Persian Gulf; it's the Arabian Sea. The Persian Gulf is relatively small. This is where most of the oil is exported. About 70% of the oil globally, I want to repeat, 70% is exported through the Persian Gulf, through this little choke point just north of Oman, where you see the name Oman. It's called the Straits of Hormuz. Straits of Hormuz are um, it's only 22 miles wide. It's kind of a real choke point. Every once in a while, Iran will threaten to close it off and stop the flow of oil coming out. The United States has made a commitment to make sure that oil flows and is distributed cleanly through the Persian Gulf out to the Indian Ocean. This promise was made in the late 70s. It is known to this day as the Carter Doctrine. This is a military commitment that the United States has made to ensure that there's a predictable flow of oil that's out to the entire world. So this is a very, very strong, other than the South China Sea, this is a real highly contested uh, source of tension in the world between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Another thing that's interesting is that the the oil fields of Iran are right down on the shores of Persian Gulf. And the oil fields in Saudi Arabia are also on their side, right down near the shores of the Persian Gulf. And so they're only about 200 miles apart from one another. So they're very, very, very close. And it suffices to say, God forbid, that if the two got into a shooting war and destroyed both of their respective oil fields, uh, this would have a tremendous impact on the global supply of oil. Now, many people are saying, well, today it doesn't really matter to the United States, the Middle East oil. We are not as dependent on oil that we used to be on Saudi Arabia. Okay, that is true. However, most of our allies still are dependent on Middle East oil, particularly in Europe and the European Union. So if there was a disruption to the flow of oil here because of hostilities, armed hostilities breaking out between the two, this would, I would suggest, put it this way, our um, our uh, our 401ks, the stock market would plunge and our personal wealth everywhere would go down dramatically. So this is still something that we want to keep a lid on as far as tensions concerned between these two groups. Um, there is approximately 1,300 miles of coastline on the Iranian side. We'll talk about the Saudi side a little bit more next week, but you can see just how close it is. Iran is on the very eastern end of the Middle East. Okay. And Iran is surrounded, if you look just at Iran, it's surrounded by all Sunni countries. So they are kind of in a little bit of a box in and of themselves. So moving on to the next, let's talk about demographics with Iran. Um, Population of Iran is 88.5 million. As I said in Interestingly, both in size and in population, it's the 18th largest country in the world globally. It's a big, big country. It's primarily mountainous. There are not a lot of roads because of the mountains and everything there. In order to get from one big city to the other in Iran, primarily you have to go by airplane. The capital of Iran is Tehran. Tehran has about 9.5 million. This is pretty conventional in most big and most large-sized countries. The capital represents about 10% of the population. One source, a major source of tension within the demographics of Iran is women, constitutes women's role in society. This is also a source of tension in Saudi Arabia. It's a little different. And this is kind of interesting. And I think it's, if you were to ask why this is so, I'm really not sure. I think it's just historically been the way that the governments have ran things. In Iran, women can drive, they can hold public office, they can work, they have all sorts of freedoms, with the exception of one major thing. And that is they must, whenever they're in public, wear clothing that covers every part of their body except their face and the tips of their hands. And so their dress is something that is very severely monitored, and it's a source of a lot of complaints. And we're going to get to that. This is very different in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, people can dress the way they want to dress. However, they cannot run for public office. Up until recently, they could not drive. And there's a very insidious system, which we'll go over in detail next week, called the guardianship system in Saudi Arabia. So it's a little bit different, but they're kind of oppressed in a little different way. But it's very much a source of unrest in both societies. Interesting thing in Iran, 60%, it's often been talked about in the Middle East that a very large percentage of the Middle East is under 30 years old or young. Okay. No country is has that phenomenon more prominently than Iran. 60% of the country is under 30 years old. 40% of the country is between the ages of 18 and 30. Okay, so they're young voters. A lot of them, think about 1979, the revolution. These, that 40, 50%, they don't even remember what happened at that point in time. This is a source of tension and a very interesting phenomenon in the country of Iran. Interestingly, in the country of Iran, because there's so many young people, they have the widest, most internet savvy population regionally of anybody. They really do, the young people, interestingly enough, not the government, but the young people truly appreciate and value and like very, very much the West. And Western, they're very much Western culturalized, which is a curious phenomenon considering the dress code, as it were, publicly in Iran. So that in of itself, I think, is that it is said that 85% of all people in the country are very internet savvy and know how to navigate around the internet to get access to information all over the world. Ethnically, I used to think that before I did a lot of research on Iran, I used to think that 80, 90% of Iranians are ethnic Persians, but that's actually not the case. Although Iran considers itself a Persian country and the people consider themselves Persian, technically only 61% of the people are ethnically Persian. 16% are Azeris. These are people who are ethnically from the country of Azerbaijan, which is just north of Iran. And then you have a smaller percentage, 10%, are Kurds or ethnic Kurds. They, in and of themselves, are a very fascinating group, primarily found in the Middle East. And they are found primarily in Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. And they became very well known, the Kurds, during the Syrian civil war. And they have had historically a lot of hostility with the country of Turkey. In the context of Iran, it is interesting to me that most of the unrest in Iran with the ethnic, with the riots they were primarily driven by women over their dress code. Most of that originated in the Kurdish part of Iran. So that in of itself to me is very interesting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about something that is very unusual and prominent in Iran. Iran has a very strong sense, probably stronger than most any other country in the world, of nationalism, a sense of cultural identity, of who they are. Their borders have been unchanged, relatively speaking, for the last 500 years. They have an identity that literally goes back 3,000 years ago. Up until, I believe it was the 1930s, they were called Persia. Okay. They changed their name to Iran at that point in time. They were then called Persia. And the Persian Empire is part of Middle East history. Persian Empire went to war with Alexander the Great, with the Roman Empire, with Greece. It goes back a long, long way. And the last country to truly conquer or colonize Persia was Genghis Khan and the Mongols in the 12th century. Since then, no other Western or Eastern country has conquered Iran. Some forces have colonized them; they've kind of squeezed them a little bit. Uh, the Mongols, of course, did way, way back when. For several hundred years, the Arabs from what is now Saudi Arabia and other Arab-based countries, they attacked Iran a great deal. Historically, Iran is just south of what was the Soviet Union, so they were squeezed a lot during, of course, during World War II and soon after World War II through the Cold War by the Russians. And we're going to talk a little bit about how they were squeezed economically and through oil by Great Britain. And what we'll talk about is how Great Britain dragged the United States into this whole thing. But by and large, because of history, the Persian people, the Iranian people, have a strong sense of self-reliance. They are instinctively suspicious of outsiders. And they do tend to have a strong sense of Persian poetry, Persian music is very pronounced, goes back a long ways, probably more so than Arabian culture. There's a sense in Persia, a sense of like cultural superiority over the Arabs. Not that it's well founded or that's appropriate, but there is a sense of that. Very quickly, I'm going to run through these slides quickly. Uh, Iranian oil and the British Empire. The British Empire got the one of the identifying characteristics of both Iran and Saudi Arabia, and this is where they're competitors to this day, is in the area of oil. And the Iran made a deal in 1901 for exclusive drilling rights for a period of 60 years, okay, to give British access to Iranian oil. At that point, they had not discovered oil, so the British were making a risk in agreeing to do this. Oil was discovered in 1907, and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which was one of the largest of investment or companies prior to World War One, was started in Iran, and it was absolutely a godsend for the British Empire during the first half of the 20th century. And you can see that quote at the bottom there. That was a verbiage said by a British politician just before World War One. So this was something that was very prized. But unfortunately, they did not give a very good deal to the local Iranians. I believe that they gave them maybe 15% of the proceeds from the oil, and they took the rest. It was a source of conflict. It was a source of tremendous conflict. But remember, in those days, Iran was poor and the British Empire was very big. So there was a huge conflict with Britain over oil. A politician came in her name was Mossadegh in around the late 1940s, and he basically nationalized the British oil and all the oil fields. And in a fury, the British tried to decided they wanted to overthrow the government, and they were unable to do it, but they were able to engage the United States and the CIA to enable a coup in Iran. Now, why did the United States do this? A lot of it was because of the dynamics of the Cold War. The British convinced the United States that Mossadegh was socialist and they were right next door to the Soviet Union, and that he was cozying up to Stalin too much, and they would just turn over their whole country to Stalin unless the United States overthrew and got a Western friendly leader in Iran. They were able to make that happen. The Shah of Iran came in, ruled oppressively, absolutely horribly for several decades, and lots of tyranny. And until 1979, when they were overthrown, the revolution took place, and the Shah of Iran, which had been very friendly with the United States, Western oriented, and also, by the way, with Israel, suddenly became Iran suddenly became America's mortal enemy. Ayatollah Khomeini, it was actually a very shrewd politician. He was always very, very sinister. I recall an image of him on the cover of Time magazine, which underneath the caption it said pure evil. And he had a very intimidating persona that way. But he actually, and he did rule the government with an iron fist, but he did think ahead, and he created a constitution which is still in play right now, is operational. And so he put into play structured rules for succession. And so he was a pretty shrewd and pretty smart player, and lots of people underestimated him. How many of you remember pictures similar to this? This is what cemented, in my humble opinion, the hatred that the United States has for Iran. Lots of people, I don't know if you feel this way, lots of people still remember the humility of Americans being marched around with blindfolds and not much being able to be done for 444 days of this hostage crisis. And the reason why this happened, why Ayatollah Khomeini did this, because they felt, and not really, not correctly so, but they felt and believed at the time that the United States was going to invade Iran. They truly believed that the United States was going to invade Iran, and felt it was necessary to get as many hostages as possible to leverage their situation. Um, this was a very, very tragic situation. It dragged out for a long time, and it truly cemented the relationship, the lack of a relationship to this day between Iran and the United States. And what was also interesting to me about this time was Americans remember 1979, by and large forget the overthrow in 1953. And in one of the painful, I would say, dumbest comments ever made by a president of the United States, a reporter asked in the middle of the hostage crisis, asked General Jimmy Carter, "Do you think we bear any responsibility in the United States for these events at the embassy due to our involvement in the 1953 coup?" And his response was, "No, that's ancient history." And the fact of the matter is, it may have been ancient history to the United States, but it was not to Iran. And there's always been this inability and unwillingness, both on the United States and on the Iranian side, to try to understand the history or culture of each other's respective countries. And that hostility is just very, very prevalent to this day. Let's talk about governance briefly. I call the governance in Iran a form of religious fascism. There is actually a parallel structure. And if you looked at it initially, you'd think, well, that's reasonably democratic, but it really isn't. There's a parallel structure of institutions that are elected by the people. They do have elections. And there's a section that's unelected. And the leader, unequivocally the leader, dictator, what you have you, is called the supreme leader. And his last name is Khamenei, as opposed to Ayatollah Khomeini. His is Ayatollah Khamenei. There's inherent tensions back and forth between many of these institutions. They do have regular elections. There are actually active debates in Parliament. There are active debates. Uh, um, there are leadership succession issues. I'll show you how that goes. And um, the general conflict between the two groups in Iran right now are called the hardliners versus the reformers. The hardliners are the older people who came with the original supreme leaders. The hardliners um, um, are the followers. These people were in their 20s and 30s and participated in the Iranian Revolution, and now they're in their 60s and 70s. And they strongly believe in living a life via Sharia law, following the precepts of Islam. The reformers are the ones that want to more, to a certain degree, want to modernize more. Um, then there's also, I call it the unifying hatreds, okay, that pull the whole country together, which is American imperialism, and of course, as defined by the overthrow, and then of course Israeli Zionism. Here's a picture, okay? Here's a picture of how the different parallel structures work. The elected institutions. There is an electorate. Take a look all the way to the left. They do elect the president. They elect the cabinet. And they actually elect the parliament, okay? However, here's where the wrinkle, where the rub comes. There's also an institution called the Guardian Council. Guardian Council is our selection, I believe it's just 12 people that are selected by the Supreme Leader over on the right side. Supreme Leader selects the members. What the Guardian Council does is the following. Anybody that wants to run for parliament or the cabinet or the presidency, anyone that wants to run has to be vetted beforehand by the Guardian Council. They have to be vetted beforehand by the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council has, can, and will veto anybody that the Supreme Leader does not think would be appropriate to become the president. So that's where the rub is. In the end, the Supreme Leader makes any and all decisions. In theory, they can veto anything that the president or the cabinet says. Usually it's unusual for them to veto what the cabinet, what the president says, but by and large, any president that's been duly elected is somebody that's acceptable to the supreme leader. But um, but often people will claim they want to run for president and or run for parliament, and it can very often happen that the Guardian Council will veto that and say, nope, you can't run. And interestingly, there has been a death of the existing president. The president was Ibrahim Raisi, and he died. And there's going to be an election. There's 6 people that have been approved by the Guardian Council. And if you, it's fair enough to say the Supreme Leader has approved any one of them. Another interesting, a couple of other interesting observations from this slide is the Assembly of Experts. The Assembly of Experts is technically created by the president, but really is also created by the Supreme Leader. Supreme Leader approves everything. This is a group of 88 clerics, and they are the ones that get together and select the new Supreme Leader when the Supreme Leader has died. Now, remember, there was a new Supreme Leader with the first Constitution in 1979. There's only been one leadership succession since. That was 1989. Okay, and the current Supreme Leader is 84 years old. So there are lots of people in the world that are watching to see how well this leadership process can work. It's certainly well laid out in their constitution. Okay, and it's almost like a similarity. One expert said that it's similar to the creation of the Pope, the selection of the new Pope, I should say, with the Council of Cardinals. And the Assembly of Experts are the Council of Cardinals. So they create the new supreme leader. Okay. One other thing to note from this chart, beneath the role of supreme leader, unusual here, the supreme leader, not the president, which is the executive leader, as is the case in many countries, has complete and total direct control of the military. They have complete and direct control of the military. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And they also have direct control over the judiciary. So this is kind of how this plays out, generally speaking. Ayatollah Ali Hosseini Khamenei, okay, Ali Hosseini Khamenei is 84 years old. He's in ill health, so it's expected that he will pass on sometime within the next few years. So lots of people are wondering if this leadership succession can be the source of turmoil in the country that could lead to better things. And of course, the answer is maybe, maybe not. This was the previous president, Ibrahim Raisi. He died in a helicopter crash just a month ago. Lots of people are wondering what's going to happen. What are the implications of Raisi's death? A couple interesting things happened last month. Within a week or two of his death, I should amend that, within a day or two, uh, lots of conspiracy theories sprouted up. It was announced that it was an accidental helicopter caused death. They went out when the weather was very, very difficult. And so anyway, that's what kind of played out and caused the crash. The conspiracy is, number one, is Israel did it. They shot the helicopter down. I think that's very far-fetched. I don't think that happened. The second conspiracy, which is plausible, is more plausible, is that some rivals to Raisi who want to get the supreme leadership role uh, shot down this plane and murdered him, basically. Uh, which it's one thing whether my personal opinion is it's plausible, but highly, highly unlikely. But it is possible. And the thing that's important to note is that within Iran, lots of people in the country do think that that's what happened. And interestingly, a person that's really raising this to a visibility level is Ibrahim Raisi's mother, who's in her mid 80s, and she has actually been giving speeches on television claiming that there are certain forces within Iran that murdered her son. So that's a very interesting thing. Right now, there's going to be an election to choose the new president. Normally, the new president has the leg up on becoming the supreme leader. The previous supreme leader was president. So that's interesting to watch in and of itself. It's also going to be interesting to see whether Iran will rush for the bomb. Will they try to immediately push hard to get the bomb? Also, within the supreme leader, because of these successions, will there be someone who's more of a reformer? Will there be somebody who is even more militant than the current supreme leader? Hard to tell. For right now, it appears that the current supreme leader is clearly in charge and is controlling this entire electoral process. Let's go over for a few minutes the Revolutionary Guard. Revolutionary Guard was a group. We've heard them mentioned many times. It's a group of a militia that Ayatollah Khomeini, when he first came to power, he decided that he could not trust the conventional military in Iran. He could not trust them. There were too many remnants of the Shah of Iran there. So he said, I'm going to create my own smaller militia that are totally and completely dedicated to me, basically, and to the precepts and tenets of the Iranian Revolution and to Islam. Okay. And he called them the Revolutionary Guard, and they are now alive and well and very, very visible in Iran and also in the various other parts of the region. You may wonder how many people are there in the Revolutionary Guard. Okay. 125,000 approximately members of the Revolutionary Guard. Their mandate is to protect the values of the revolution. To protect the values of the revolution, their supreme loyalty is to the clerical establishment. They have charge within the government to enforce the Islamic morality code. You've ever heard about the morality police? They walk around and they will throw into jail women that are not dressed properly out in public. The morality police are part and parcel of the military establishment of the Revolutionary Guard. They are also part of what is known as the Quds Force. The Quds Force conduct foreign espionage for the government of Iran, both globally and particularly within the region. Okay, and the Quds Force also is the intermediary between Iran and their proxies. Their proxies, it could be Syria, it could be Hezbollah, it could be Hamas. The Quds Force are members of the Revolutionary Guard. They also oversee Iran's ballistic missiles program. So that in and of itself, I think, is pretty interesting. They have become not just an arm for the supreme leader, but they've also become a very dominant political and economic force. Many people have been leaders on the politics end, and then later moved over to be leaders in the economic side. This is a very important thing to remember. Their support for the supreme leader, and right now their loyalty appears to be steadfast. Their support is key to the survival of the regime. So when the United States and people talk about, boy, how do we get rid of this regime? And what can we do to make that happen? Initially, instinctively, people say, well, let's just overthrow them. Bad idea. All I will do is just bring the government together and just reinforce the reputation of the United States in this whole thing. What is conceivable, I wouldn't say it's likely, but it's conceivable, is that some members of the Revolutionary Guard internally within the government could get together and decide they're going to overthrow the supreme leader. That is something that's very plausible. That could happen. That has been the way that military coups have happened throughout the globe, even in places like Indonesia, Egypt. They're all over Africa. Smaller groups from the military that are embedded in the core apparatus, okay, the core infrastructure, have gotten together and overthrown things. That is something that is at least plausible. But remember, there's also another plausible alternative, and that is that the people who do this could be even more hardline and more evil than the current supreme leader. That is also very possible. That's why we should be careful for what we wish for. There have been a lot of people, for example, Vladimir Putin, that say, we wish that somebody would overthrow this evil man within the government. Okay, that's all fine and good, but maybe those people are even worse than Vladimir Putin is. So that's something that we should should take into consideration. So that is the Revolutionary Guard. Now let's move on quickly to the unrest in Iran. This is very, very important as we're following this. The source of the unrest in Iran were women primarily, women and to some extent youth. These women, there have been something like 5,000 women that have been arrested, and over 500 have been executed. And so I want to stress this fact. Those that have been leading this are very, very, very brave. And the response from the government has been absolutely brutal. No nonsense, no discussion, whatsoever. It did make me kind of laugh when I thought of what some of the women have done here is take their hijabs and throw them in a fire and burn them. And it kind of reminded me of the 60s when young people would burn their draft cards. And as a matter of fact, some people at one of the groups reminded me of the idea in the 60s of women burning their bras, sort of just at that point in time. So these people, primarily driven by very, very brave women. What's behind this social unrest? Uh, it's kind of a battle between the morality police, who are just absolutely unbending, and the role of women, and the belief that women want to be able to dress the way they want to dress. Okay. There's also a huge dissatisfaction of youth amongst this. And remember, we talked about disproportionately how many people are younger within the population, within the demographics of Iran. The government has been totally unresponsive. They're not doing very well. Economically, they're hurting. Inflation's very high. Hardliners tend to dominate the government, the parliament, and all the state institutions, and there are absolutely no negotiations going on. The government will have nothing to do with that. There have been lots of rivals within the last 15 years. They are unwilling to even contemplate what the roots of protest are and deal with them. And what's happened, which is very interesting to see what plays out, is that the regime has lost the support of the majority of Iranians. Keep an eye on this within the country of Iran. Let's see how that might have a sea change in the relationship with Saudi Arabia. In a nutshell, there's a cycle here of protest, uh, there's government brute force, a cycle of defiance, repression, defiance, repression. The youth are very desperate for change in and of itself. On the other hand, you've got a theocracy which is obstinate, they're aging, and they're very isolated from the rest of the population. So we'll see how that'll play out. Let's talk very briefly. I'm running low on time and I'm behind myself here a little bit. Um, the source of allies for Iran in the region is a little different with Saudi Arabia. Source of allies for Iran is their regional proxies. The proxies will actually are willing on behalf of Iran to fight, to engage in hostilities, and support Iran in that context. What we need to remember here are some examples of proxies. What we need to remember, and this is very important and misunderstood, very much misunderstood by the West. People in the West believe that whatever Iran dictates to these proxies will go ahead and do it. That the relationship is a master-slave relationship. And that is not true. These proxies have a varying degree of influence from Iran. They will listen to Iran, but in the end, they're still going to do what they think is in their interest. And very, very often, they will engage in an attack, engage in hostilities, and Iran didn't even know about it. And I'll give you an example. October 7th in Israel, the attack by Hamas in Israel. Immediately after the attack, many media outlets in the West, one particularly, which was the Wall Street Journal editorial page, very well respected, immediately said, perhaps you all did too. Iran's behind this. We have to engage directly with Iran. And that was not the case. Hamas did this on their own. They did not ask for, Iran supported it after it took place, but they did this on their own. The other proxies didn't know that Hamas was going to do this. They engaged and they made a decision on their own to do this. Now, on this list, which I'll go over quickly, I put this in order of degree of influence. Hezbollah has the highest, they are more influenced than the others by Iran. Iran helped them come about. Hezbollah is a terrorist group that is in the north, is in north of Israel, and has engaged, interacted hostile manners with the Israelis over the last 30 years or so. They are part of the population of Lebanon. So they always have to be conscious of having the support of the Lebanese people. There are Shiite militias within Iraq. They are the ones that engaged in the attack on Jordan, on an American base where three soldiers were tragically killed. They are embedded with Syria. They support Syria dramatically. They do have a relationship with Hamas and also with the Houthis. The Houthis in Yemen did not get much of a relationship with Iran until they were attacked by the Saudis. But Hamas and Houthis do not have quite as much of an influence from Iran as the others do. Um, this just shows where there are proxy battlegrounds. Okay, in orange, the proxies are engaged in battlegrounds with allies primarily of Saudi Arabia. There are battlegrounds going on within Iraq, within Syria, within Lebanon, you see up in the north, and also, of course, in Yemen. Yemen. So it's very, very prominent. And those things have been ongoing for decades. So the proxies are very much a part of the Iranian strategy. Now, what really does Iran want? What does Iran want here when all's said and done? They want, realistically, to be the dominant force within the region. They would love more than anything else to coerce the United States to leave the region. They want them to coerce them to leave the region. They would like more than anything. Now, I used to have the adjective destroy the state of Israel. They can't do that. They do not have the military firepower to destroy the state of Israel. But what they can do, conceivably, is delegitimize the state of Israel. You hear that word often. Another word for delegitimize is to marginalize. What that means to me is to make that country less relevant. Okay. They're still existing, but they're less relevant. That would be a dream scenario for Iran, for Israel to become less relevant and for the United States to leave the region totally. Actually, it'd be the West to leave the region totally. They want to consider to continue to provide dollars and military support to their proxies, okay? To their proxies to do their bidding in various backgrounds to enhance their influence. This is very important to remember. They do not necessarily support the Palestinian cause for a two-state solution. Hamas doesn't support a two-state solution, neither does Hezbollah. Their preference is they don't want to have even half of a piece to be in the hands of a Jewish state. They want the whole piece of the pie. So that's another thing that's important to sort of remember. So closing down a little bit here, what are some of the issues about Iran to be aware of, to be mindful of, and also as it relates to Saudi Arabia, the interaction with Saudi Arabia. The Iranian people, the government is totally unresponsive. They are completely and totally unresponsive, and they are very willing to suppress their people, and they've lost the support of their people. If the government is deposed, it is really, really important that this be done from within. The United States or Saudi Arabia, for that matter, should be very, very, very careful to allow there be no handprints or footprints or fingerprints or whatever of the CIA or any other external source. Remember, the Iranians are very, very distrustful of outsiders. It'll be interesting to see what the new Supreme Leader succession process, whether or not that can go smoothly. There's a great deal of worry about nuclear. We didn't even talk about the nuclear development program within Iran. It's fair to say that if Iran were to get a nuclear program of any kind, who do you think is going to be the next country that's going to want it? Saudi Arabia. Absolutely. Saudi Arabia will want to have the same thing, and they will come to the United States to get it. They will come to the United States without any question to get it. So as long as these hostilities take place, there's always a worry about Saudi Arabia and the United States, and they're pairing, I should say, against Iran. How that would actually play out. What will the relationship be with the proxies? Will they consider? They kind of hide behind the proxies. That's what they've kind of done at this point in time, and let the proxies do their bidding for them, because then they can get deniability and they can say, "Hey, it wasn't us; it was the proxies that did this or that." There seems to be no sign, though, of the tensions with the United States and Iran. And what is that going to ultimately do? Thinking in the context of the contrast to Saudi Arabia, the tensions between Iran and the United States are going to bring the United States and Saudi Arabia closer together. And that has always had it. And by the way, we'll talk more about that next week. They will bring Saudi Arabia closer to Israel. Let's remember, and I'll talk about this in a great deal next week, the Abraham Accords was primarily not a peace outreach to Israel, but it was a reflection of a fear of Iran by Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. So the fear of Iran drove that, and a fear of Iran by the Saudis is driving them and the Arab world closer to the United States. So I wanted to just close by just making the observation, once again, bringing more into play of the Saudis, of this rivalry between the two, and the huge role that the United States has between this, and the fact that the Saudis are reaching out, are starting to show some outreach, not just even more so the United States, but more so towards Israel. We'll talk about that next week to normalize with Israel. They don't just want military support from Israel, okay, because they're afraid the United States might leave the area. They realize Israel has a tremendous amount of military power within the Middle East. They also want the expertise to develop economically. Saudi Arabia does, and develop technologically. They want to get that as well. So it's a very curious situation. And I want to close with this, that they're actually coming together, that uh, Iran and the fear of Iran and their military and everything else. The Saudis don't have a very strong military. Once again, we'll talk about that next week. The fear of the military is pushing the Arab states, which historically have been at war with the state of Israel, pushing them even a little bit closer together. Okay. And we'll have to see how that plays out in the context of the United States as well. So, with that, Kay, I'm happy to turn this back to you. I will go through a stop share here.
Okay, so we have a few questions lined up. We're going to go back to looking at Iran's oil and the deals there. With all the embargoes against Iran and the sale of its oil by Western countries, where does their oil go if it's, this person is wondering if it's not to the Western countries? I'm assuming to the East, but they're just
Good
kind of wondering.
assumption. Iran has had this attitude and approach, both militarily, economically, and everything else, called look to the East. That's the term that's been used. And they have most of the oil, frankly, goes to China. And it also goes to Southeast Asia, which have many growing economies as well, to places like Vietnam, to Indonesia. And if you look at a global map, that's reasonable close proximity to the Persian Gulf. Goes right out through the Indian Ocean, and next thing you know, you're in the South China Sea, and of course, the world's largest country, and that's India. And so India and Pakistan, Pakistan lesser so, but India for sure, China, and Southeast Asia is where most of the, and also I forgot Africa. Lots of these countries. One of the things that has been very interesting in the context, this is getting globally here, or thinking globally, but in the context of Ukraine, Russia invaded Ukraine.
Mhm.
And Iran immediately supported Russia and has supported Russia militarily. What is very interesting about that invasion of Ukraine, and of course, China supported Russia invaded the African countries and the countries in Southeast Asia, the area that's called the global South, all these unaligned countries and everything, none of them, they have remained neutral on this war. And the United States and other Western countries in Europe are very upset about that. They expected these countries to side with them against Russia, but they're not doing that. And why is that? They want to hedge so that they can stay in the good economic graces of China, and they want to be able to get Iranian oil. So there's all these dynamics that have played out.
Okay.
Okay.
So some more questions about proxies. Wondering why the groups that support Iran are called proxies instead of allies.
Um, if you look at the list of that, that's a great question too, as the first one was. Um, if you look at the list, almost all of them are not, I repeat, not countries. They are not nation states. Primarily, and let's look at each of them very, very quickly. Syria is the exception. And of course, there was a horrific revolutionary war in Syria, and Iran went into uh, Syria to help them. And interestingly, it was Iran who um, who convinced the Soviet Union to get participated in the Syrian war, and that was a pivotal point there. The other ones, Hezbollah is a separate, unique, smallish terrorist group within the country of Lebanon. And so I shouldn't even say smallish. They represent, maybe 100,000 fighters, things like that. But nonetheless, they are part of a larger entity of the country of Iran. And a lot of that is the phenomenon, Lebanon, I'm sorry, is a part of the country of Lebanon. Part of that is the phenomenon that in Lebanon, unlike any other country in the Middle East, 30% of their population is Christian. It's not Islam, it's not whatever. So 30, 40% are Christian. And so it's kind of divided up. So it's really that segment that is supportive of hostility with Israel in Hezbollah. Now, I mentioned Syria. The other ones are Hamas is also a separate entity, a separate group, and they are stationed primarily in Gaza, which as of now is not a nation state. Another topic to be discussed is about two-state solution and all that, but it's not part of there now. So that's a separate group. And the Houthis have taken over the government, taken over the capital of Yemen, but by and large, they do not have control of the country. And so they are not reflective of the country necessarily. They're reflective of their own small group. And the last of the five proxies are the group of Shias that are in Iraq. Iraq is part Shia and part Sunni. The Sunni part has nothing to do with the Shia militias. So the real distinction is whether or not you're part of a nation state. If you're not part of a nation state, it's a smallish group that have their own military infrastructure within all these countries that create havoc, like in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, places along those lines, and in Iraq.
Okay. Okay. How come it's okay that Israel has nuclear weapons, but not Iran? Which is an interesting.
That's a
Is it
very fair
okay?
question. And, pardon me, I laugh because lots of people ask that question all the time. And, why is this so in the Middle East? Why is that so in the Middle East? I would throw out the question, why are we friends with Iran and not, why are we friends with Saudi Arabia, not with Iran? And the same answer is related to both, and that's history.
Mhm.
And that's history. It's related to, if you want to state that's kind of hypocritical, that's fair enough. That's fair enough to say. Uh, there are um, probably the reason, which is not a fair answer, is the United States are friends with Israel, and they're not friends with Iran. So that's the reason. Uh, but I'm sure that to the person who asked the question, that's not an acceptable answer, and I get that. But that's kind of what has played out. It really is the detailed history of that Israel on their own, developed nuclear weapons in the 1950s and 1960s. They did not have the support of the United States, and they have very cleverly um, uh, never ever, it's considered to be the worst kept secret in the world. They've never admitted having nuclear weapons publicly in a
Mm.
public statement. But I can tell you right now here, and I won't get in trouble, and I know this is being recorded, they do. Okay. Uh, and now they've amended some of their terminology and said, they've never said, well, we may have nuclear weapons, but they have said, we will never be the first ones to use nuclear weapons in the region. They've definitively said it that way. And um, it was done in the early 50s and 60s without the support of the United States. They were unhappy in the 60s. The closest they ever got caught by the United States on this issue, interestingly enough, was by John F. Kennedy about a month before he was assassinated. And then they got off the hook again because he was killed. And American presidents have not pressed the issue much. It's sort of been that old thing from Schultz. I don't see it. I don't hear it. I hear nothing. And they just don't want to know. Uh, um, so it's kind of something that Israel's kept in their back pocket just in case. They did contemplate using nuclear weapons in the 73 war after 2 days when they were losing. There was discussion to have a nuclear attack on Cairo. Uh, Israel's a very, very small country. So nuclear and Iran's a very big country. So the dynamics of nuclear attacks on either one is very, very different. Having said that, though, I want to stress this. Israel is a very, very powerful military country, and they have by far the strongest technology and military of any country in the Middle East. Uh, so that's really all I can say. It's a lot of it is based on history. And uh, could they or should they? Could Iran? Should they have it because Israel has it? You know, you could also argue the issue or discuss the issue of uh, would Iran be responsible? Probably not. Is Israel being more responsible? Yeah, I think they are. But having said that, they've been engaged in a lot of wars, but they haven't used nuclear weapons. Um, and but those are kind of, I will admit to you, to the questioner, those are kind of lame answers. They really
So,
are kind of lame answers, if you know what I mean, Kay.
do you have any prediction if Iran will become a nuclear power, like in 5 years, or?
Um, yes, I think they already are. Uh, I think that they will become a nuclear power in the same way that North Korea is a nuclear power. And North Korea is a nuclear power, but there is so much, and this is one of the big reasons why, and this is as political as I'm gonna get today. Okay. I always have felt strongly the United States has to continue to try to be very deeply engaged in the world as a source for good. We don't always do it. In fact, sometimes we screw up royally, but we need to stay engaged. I will confess to you, I'm not an isolationist. And I'm convinced that the strong presence of the United States on the Korean Peninsula is one of the big reasons, and support of Japan, why North Korea, they are a nuclear state, but they do not represent a huge major threat. And I envision that Iran is probably 80, 90% there. I was a supporter of the Iran nuclear deal. I wish that it had not been canceled. It is what it is, but that's also. Uh, but there will be a domino effect if Iran ever uh, takes steps to actively use nuclear weapons elsewhere in the region. I am sure that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, they'll just bang on the United States door and say, "All right, we want them too."
Mhm.
And that will be very, very ugly. And the ugliest thing of all is that these weapons get in the arms of really, really unstable actors. Now, I'm in the minority here, but I'm not so sure. I get flack for this, but I'm not, this is a very good, excellent, open, debatable question. And I'll be curious what people think in the audience here. Is Iran an unstable actor? And what I mean by that is, are they suicidal? Would they put their country at risk to attack Israel with a nuclear weapon? Because I guarantee you, um, Israel has the ability. They have nuclear weapons on submarines. They have nuclear weapons they could launch from ships. And it's not too far-fetched to say that they could liquidate tens of millions of Iranians with one fell swoop if Iran does that. And maybe we're getting to a point which is a little scary, like we were in the Cold War, of mutual destruction. We were scared of the Russians, they were scared of us because they knew they could wipe us out, but they knew that we could wipe them out, and we knew they could wipe us out. So everyone just stopped and didn't do anything. Maybe we're getting to that point in the Middle East. Um, I think that Iran still cares about Iran, and they know what the power is of the state of Israel, that they could just wipe them out if they wanted to. They have military strikes right now. Iran has maybe two military nuclear bombs. Israel has 50 to 100. So I really don't worry so much
Mhm.
about that. Uh, about Now, there are a lot of Israelis who think otherwise, and they live there. So, and I get that. I really do get that. I might think differently if I was living there and I had to deal with that threat. So that's some food for thought. And if you have any responses or thoughts on that, I'd be very interested to hear them because that's a very good debatable topic.
Okay. Question about elections, just something, and it's like, who gets to vote? And what age? And are there any other restrictions?
Okay. Um, I don't know if it's 18 or 21. I don't know the age. In Iran, women can vote and they can be in parliament. So women vote. Of course,
Oh,
men vote as well. Uh, and as far as other restrictions, I don't believe there are any. It's just the point I was trying to make today was it's a curious thing that the restrictions on women's rights are there and oppressive in Iran, and there's no tolerance for change. And they are in Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure there's no tolerance for change there, limited anyway. But it's different. For some reason, clothing is no big deal in Saudi Arabia, and it is in Iran. But in Saudi Arabia, women are restricted as far as their work environment, as far as what they can do in the social workplace, as driving. But they can wear whatever they want. It's just a curious thing, and I'm not sure exactly why that is.
so the young people being influenced by the West isn't necessarily having as much. I mean, that's having some effect on riots and stuff, but not.
Well, remember the thing that when you look at that original chart, it
Mhm.
appears like, hey, this is kind of democratic, but it's because of the Guardian Council. They vet, and this happens all the time. There are lots and lots, and in the last election, prior to the one that's coming up, when Raisi won, uh, 85% of the people that wanted to run for president were not allowed to by the Guardians Council because the supreme leader, a lot of it was considered as an action that the supreme leader was going to um, make sure that there was a hardliner in place. He wanted really because he figures he's going to die soon.
Mhm.
So he wants to have a president who can come in that thinks like him. So they did not allow many, many people to participate, many more than in previous elections. And what do you think happened? This is very interesting, Kay, is that the uh, participation rate was very, very low. The participation rate in the election was 49% nationwide, compared to something like 70% historically in Iran. Even with the Islamic Republic. And in Tehran, where there are many, many young people live, the participation rate was something like 26%. So what a lot of the young people did was says, I don't like any of these candidates. So what did they do? They stayed home, which is, you can argue that's what maybe some people are thinking in the United States now too. It's an interesting phenomenon. And a lot of that's related to, as you stated, they're very internet savvy, they're very Western, so they want reform. So it's an interesting dynamic and a tug and pull with the dictator. The young people are pulling in another way, and just how that can uh, play out sometime into the future.
So does Trump being up for reelection, how does that play into um, Iran's view of, is it favorable to them? Is it not favorable? Just having this,
Trump is very, very, and I suppose you could say this about the Republican Party versus Democratic Party, very, very, very hostile towards Iran, considers them the ultimate mortal enemy.
yeah,
And um, some there have been some polls, primarily amongst the Democratic Republican Party, that have stated that Iran is the most mortal enemy the United States has anywhere on the planet. Um, I personally, um, I mean, I think that kind of pains me. I think that's very, very unfortunate. And also, it doesn't make sense. Iran is not. Sometimes some politicians will say Iran is an existential threat to the United States. You could argue it is to Israel, but it's not to the United States. Iran has 2% the GDP of the United States. It's far, far away. It cannot. Iran is never going to initiate a nuclear attack on the United States. That's not going to happen. They will in their region. They can wreak havoc in their region. They are not a threat, in my mind, even to Europe, to Western Europe, or to the United States. And I don't worry about Iran. I worry about their behavior in the region, but not as far as my world is going to end tomorrow because I'm going to get attacked by Iran. Uh, I think sometimes in the Republican Party, let's just get it more general instead of Trump versus whatever.
yeah.
There is a couching that Iran is just the biggest existential threat to the United States there is. And I think that's nonsense. Uh, uh, you know, I don't think China is either, but that's a whole other topic. Possibly Russia is more, but not existential. But where are the threats and everything? That's a whole other topic. But uh, I think that there's a little bit less of that sense within the Democratic Party. Although having said that, during the Gaza war, remember there was a tremendous pressure in the beginning and now on Hezbollah in the north not to invade Israel. And the United States took a step which very much surprised me. And Biden took a step and he took these very powerful missile laden, maybe even nuclear missile laden battleships and parked one right on the coast in international waters adjacent to Lebanon. That was a message, you know, don't
Mhm.
do this. Don't even think about doing this. I thought that was pretty interesting and a pretty strongly worded message. By and large, thus far anyway, it worked. Who knows for the future though?
Okay, let's see. We've got a number of questions still.
I'm
Um,
happy to stay on, whatever you say, Kay.
we'll see what we can get through here.
Or see if you can combine any.
Okay, so we're going to talk about women again really quick here in terms of, can they initiate divorce, sign contracts, um, report domestic abuse? Do they have rights or not?
No. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Just no.
Um, the 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 system is um, more organized. There's a thing called, and we'll talk about that next week, a guardianship system, which is starting to break down a little bit, but it's absolutely horrible to the point of women's lives can be at stake. I mean, you can justify and be protected in the guardianship system to murder in some Islamic societies. It's just absolutely horrible, and and associated things, abuse, rape, what have you, and shared marriages. God forbid there be adultery or something like that that goes on. Um, um, the men get off scot-free, and the women just they don't. I've said this many times when I talk about society in the Middle East. It's very there are a lot of bigotries and prejudices. They can be religious based, they can be ethnically based, and yes, sexually based. Now, if you don't mind, I'll just tell you one other interesting aside. In the Kurdish ethnicity, in their environment, 30% of their military, which is very, very skilled, are women. 30% of them are women. And there is a very famous battle called the Battle of Kobani, which took place in northern Syria, which was the battle against ISIS at that point in time. It is the turning point, the pivot point of that battle around 2015 or so. And the leaders of the other side were Kurds, and most of them were women. So there you have it. It can be both sides can be both extreme. It's very, very interesting and unusual that way. Sorry I
Okay.
went off on that tangent.
No, no, totally fascinating. Quick question. What is Iran's relationship with Pakistan and Afghanistan since those countries are primarily Sunni?
Uh, right next door to each of them, uh, uh, their relationship. First of all, let's talk about Afghanistan. They have historically been very, very hostile towards the Taliban. Isn't that interesting? They are Sunni. That's also true. There's also they are the Taliban's a different ethnicity, and the name has escaped me. Maybe someone in the panel will remember the ethnicity of the Taliban. They are different than the Persians. And here is an example where, once again, similar to Saudi Arabia, the combination of the Sunni versus Shia and the Pashtun. That's it. That's it. I was going over in my mind as I said this. The name of the ethnicity of the Taliban is Pashtun. Pashtun. The Iranians hate them. They don't like the Taliban. In fact, they secretly provided the United States intelligence in 2002, right after the 9/11, when attacks, when the United States engaged in a war in Afghanistan. Iran has secretly been giving them, United States of all places, intelligence there. So that's in and of itself kind of interesting. Um, by and large, they're not very friendly with either Pakistan or Afghanistan. More so, they're friendly, I think, with Pakistan. A lot of what dictates that is how Saudi Arabia has jumped back and forth in their relationship with Pakistan. Interestingly, a lot of people are saying that number one, Pakistan's a nuclear state. They have given some of their technology to North Korea. And it is said that if Saudi Arabia ever becomes a nuclear state, they'll probably buy it from Pakistan. It's said that that's how that'll happen. It's not happening yet, and that's one of those very complicated dynamics that the United States has to juggle as well. And by and large, as you probably know, the United States, generally speaking, has been more um, friendly to Pakistan than Afghanistan, of course.
Okay. I'm going to do one final question that we can bridge into next week, because it's
Okay,
saying with
fine.
so much oil in Iran, why is their economic strength so much lower than Saudi Arabia?
Very simply, because Saudi Arabia can sell to everyone, and the spigot is turned off from Iran with with not just the United States. That's been turned off for 30, 40 years, but Western Europe. you know, you should never underestimate. Most of us think in terms of military when we look at the globe, and sometimes we really need to think economically. The European Union is as strong economically as the United States is. I mean, it is tremendously strong. Militarily, it's not, but economically, it's very, very strong and has a huge GOP is about equal to the United States. And so for the European Union to cut off from Iran totally is really a hurtful kind of a step. And so that on top of the Iran used to get from the United States, get a lot of produce, get a lot of product. That is all stopped because of the broaching, the ending of the nuclear deal and everything. So it's mainly because of China still purchase from them. They make up for some of it because they purchase from Iran. They don't have to purchase elsewhere. So China keeps Iran afloat. But these economic boycotts from has been just brutal on both on Iran has been just brutal, and we shall see what has played out. And I'm going to talk a little bit next week about what the economic challenges are that Saudi Arabia is trying to grasp with. Some of which Iran shares, some of them they don't.
Okay, well, we're gonna draw things to a close here. And we want to thank you, Henry. It was a very informative presentation. And we want to also thank Grayson Simmons, who's been providing our behind the scenes help today. And we'll be meeting next week. We want to remind you these sessions are being recorded. So in case you know someone who missed it, or if you want to rewatch anything, you can view this on the Ollie YouTube channel. I'll also be posting it on the Ramsey County Library library events videos when it's up. And otherwise, thanks everyone for a great session, for all the great questions, and we will see you next Tuesday to look at Saudi Arabia. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.